Before time took shape, they already existed. Beings made of light, structured by the very voice of the Creator, shaped with purpose and power to guard the balance of the cosmos. Among these magnificent beings, there was one whose brilliance transcended function and hierarchy, Azazel, the tireless watchman, the knower of secrets, the angel who observed humanity in its fragile and silent beginnings. He was not created to destroy. It wasn't created to challenge. It was not created to teach what is forbidden. But when the boundary between heaven and earth began to tremble, when the will of heaven encountered the vulnerability of humanity, a deviation occurred, deviation so profound that it would mark the entire spiritual history of mankind. Azazel, the guardian, became the transgressor. The peace instructor became the master of corruption. The bearer of knowledge has become the messenger of chaos. And with his downfall, his name was feared, hidden, torn from the pages of official scripture, but never forgotten in the background of sacred history. Today, you will enter this forbidden mystery. Prepare to hear the story that many avoid telling. Today you will discover what truly lies behind the name Azazel, the fallen angel who, according to ancient writings, taught human secrets that forever changed the destiny of Earth. You clicked on this video to understand. Who was Azazel? Why does your name appear linked to the scapegoat in the Old Testament? What does the Bible not reveal, but ancient manuscripts describe in rich detail? Why was it considered so dangerous, so destructive, so corrupting? That tradition says God ordered its guilt to be symbolically placed on an animal thrown into the desert. But what you're about to hear goes far beyond those questions. What I'm going to reveal is how Azazel influenced humanity, how his rebellion began, and why even today his name is associated with spiritual chaos and profound sin. If you thought you knew who Azazel was, get ready. You are about to discover a truth that has been hidden for millennia. Before we delve into this forbidden mystery, I only ask one quick thing of you. Subscribe to the channel, because here you'll find secrets that many don't have the courage to reveal. Leave a like, because it shows YouTube that you want more content like this. Comment now, I want the truth, so I know you are one of those who seek the deep and hidden knowledge of the ancient scriptures. Now, take a deep breath. The story is about to begin. When we speak of Azazel, we speak of one of the most mysterious, enigmatic, and feared names in ancient sacred literature. If you try to find details about him in the traditional Bible, you'll find almost nothing. And that, in itself, is already a warning sign. Why does a character associated with such an important ritual, the Day of Atonement ritual described in Leviticus, appear so discreetly, almost hidden, almost like a whisper between the lines? Why does a name that carries so much spiritual weight only appear twice and then disappear? There is an answer to that. And it begins long before Moses, long before the liberation from Egypt, long before Israel existed as a people. The story of Azazel dates back to the pre-flood era, a period in which, according to ancient manuscripts such as the Book of Enoch, the heavens watched over the earth attentively. Guardian angels, called watchers, were assigned to monitor the development of humanity, a humanity that was still learning to survive, cultivate, organize itself, build, and create. The order was clear: observe, but do not interfere. But among these watchers there were some who, observing human beauty, human innocence, and human vulnerability, began to desire something that did not belong to them. The beginning of the downfall was not a sudden decision. It was a seed planted in the heart of each of them, a seed that developed slowly, silently, until it finally sprouted in rebellion. And among all the leaders of this downfall, Azazel stood out. He stood out not for his strength, but for his knowledge. He stood out not for his rebelliousness, but for his influence. He stood out not for violence, but for intellectual seduction. According to these ancient traditions, Azazel was the one who taught humanity techniques that until then were exclusive to the celestial spheres, the use of metals, the manufacture of weapons, mirror polishing, the art of cosmetics, enchantments, riddles, and advanced forms of spiritual and material manipulation, to humans that looked like evolution, to heaven that was corruption. Humanity, created to grow in its own time, began to arm itself, to take pride, to adorn itself, to divide itself, to wage war. And the knowledge that should be sacred has become dangerous. According to these writings, Azazel transformed the world, but not as a guardian, as a corrupter. And it is precisely here that the tension surrounding his name begins. The traditional Bible does not develop this narrative. It only mentions the ritual in which the sins of Israel were symbolically placed on a goat sent into the desert for Azazel, as if the desert were his domain. But why is that? Where does this figure, so strong, so dark, so isolated, come from? Why is the desert the place associated with him? What does this have to do with the fate of the ancient world? To understand this, we need to go back to the most critical moment in the history of the Watchers. According to tradition, when God saw that the earth was being corrupted by the mixing of angels and humans, by the teaching of forbidden secrets, and by the spread of chaos and violence, a sentence was decreed. The security guards would be punished, but Azazel would be punished in a special way. God commanded that he be arrested, chained, thrown into the desert, covered in darkness, and kept that way until the day of final judgment. And that's exactly why its name is connected to the scapegoat, a symbol of guilt being carried away to the desert, to a place where evil was isolated and prevented from returning to the people. But there's more, much more. What few people know is that, for several ancient Jewish traditions, the ritual of Leviticus was not merely symbolic. It was a memory, a recollection that one day, at the beginning of time, a powerful entity tried to destroy God's plan for humanity. And that, each year, Israel remembered this fall, sending the sins back to the desert, the place of exile of the fallen angel. From here on, you'll realize that Azazel's story is much deeper than what's written. And that's precisely what makes this narrative so fascinating. The feeling that something is hidden, concealed, buried on purpose. Why bury? Why hide it? Perhaps because humanity wasn't ready. Perhaps because knowledge could turn into fascination, and fascination into ruin. The fact is, the story of Azazel is the story of a being who crossed the boundary between heaven and earth and could never return. And this is just the beginning. Azazel's story becomes even more intense when we delve into the world that surrounded him. To understand who he became and why his figure is so feared and silently preserved in ancient traditions, we need to understand the environment of the Watchers, those angels sent to earth with a single purpose: to observe. Hand off. Do not teach. Do not influence. Just observing. The Watchers formed a specific group within the celestial hierarchy. They were spirits of authority and vigilance, endowed with profound knowledge about the creation and workings of the cosmos. They witnessed the development of humanity from its earliest steps, observing from afar the progress of a being still fragile, but with extraordinary potential. But potential is a dangerous thing. A growing being, naive, curious, impressionable, is like a still soft vase in the hands of the one who molds it. And it was precisely these impressionable beings who began to awaken unprecedented emotions in the Watchers. Imagine for a moment being a creature made of light, millennia old, accustomed to celestial perfection, and suddenly witnessing beings so fragile, so limited, yet endowed with creativity, emotion, desire, vulnerability, and freedom. In essence, they were everything that angels were not. And that sparks something: desire, jealousy, fascination, a desire to get closer, to participate, to teach, even if it meant violating a direct order from the Creator. According to the Book of Enoch, about 200 angels descended to Mount Hermon to forge a pact of rebellion. And among these angels were names that echo like thunder in ancient traditions: Semyaza, Arachiel, Sariel, Barachiel, and Azazel. But here's a crucial detail. It wasn't Azazel who started the rebellion, but he was the one who deepened it the most. Semyaza, according to the writings, was the formal leader of the fall of the Watchers, but Azazel was responsible for spreading the forbidden knowledge that would transform that rebellion into a catastrophe. To understand this, we need to understand what forbidden knowledge is. These are not ordinary secrets. We are talking about information that shapes reality, techniques that accelerate civilizations, tools that give power, and power corrupts. While the other Watchers taught specific arts, astrology, earth signs, celestial cycles, Azazel taught that which elevated human beings beyond their natural structure. He taught metallurgy, something that would only be discovered naturally millennia later. Teaching it so far ahead of time meant allowing a primitive civilization to become an armed civilization. Think about what this means. A group of frail humans who previously fought with stones and sticks now had access to bronze, iron forged blades, weapons that could destroy, conquer, dominate. Azazel not only gave power, he gave them the advantage. An advantage causes war. But he didn't stop there. He also taught the art of artificial beauty, something that seems commonplace to us today, but which was revolutionary at the time. Enamels, paints, shiny metals, cosmetics, adornments, all of this attracted attention and desire. Women, once simple, became coveted. Man, once humble, became violent out of greed. He taught spells, spiritual manipulations, divination techniques, omen reading, invocation of forces, everything that opened doors to the spiritual world in a disordered and destructive way. The human world has accelerated in a few decades what should have taken millennia. And this created a big problem. Humanity was not ready. The more knowledge he acquired, the further he drifted from his true self. The more weapons it produced, the more it destroyed. The more spells he learned, the more he surrendered to corrupted spirituality. The angels watched, initially with pride. But it didn't take long for them to realize they had created a monster. And this monster had a name: corruption. The world that was once pure has turned into chaos. Violence dominated the villages. Tyrannical kings arose. Women were taken as trophies. Men killed each other for pieces of shiny metal. And, according to tradition, even the giants, the Nephilim, offspring of the Watchers and the daughters of men, began to consume creation, destroying crops, devouring herds, and finally attacking humans themselves. The planet collapsed. And when the Creator observed this growing chaos, he decreed an end to the rebellion. But before the punishment, before the flood, before the imprisonment of the Watchers, there was an intermediary, Enoch. Enoch, the man who walked with God, was called to be the messenger of judgment. He was the one who heard the divine order. He was the one who went down to the Watchers to say that there would be no forgiveness. Imagine the moment. A mortal man, without brilliance, without wings, without power, standing before gigantic, luminous beings, full of glory, but now desperate, repentant, ashamed. Enoch pronounced the sentence, "God saw what you did. God saw the corruption they spread. God saw the suffering they caused. There will be no turning back. You will be punished until the day of final judgment. And you will see your children destroyed before your very eyes." The watchmen trembled. But none of them received a sentence as harsh as Azazel's. For him, the punishment was unique, isolated, and emblematic. It was said, "They will hold Azazel accountable for all the iniquities of the world." It's as if God were saying, "All the corruption started with you. All violence sprang from its seed. All of humanity's distortions stem from his teachings. Therefore, the blame for the ancient world will fall on you. And this is where the story connects directly to the traditional Bible. The ritual in Leviticus, in which a goat is set apart for Azazel and sent into the desert, originates from this ancient understanding. The idea that Azazel carries the guilt of the people, just as he carried the guilt of early humanity. But why the desert? Why not somewhere else? For the ancients, the desert was a place of chaos, of the absence of life, of separation, of divine isolation. The desert represented the anti-Eden, the opposite of blessing. It was the place where fallen entities were isolated, far from the presence of God and the people. It was a no place where nobody lives, where nothing grows. And so, where should a being like Azazel reside? Here we notice something striking. Even those who read the Bible without knowing these ancient texts notice that there is something different in the passage from Leviticus 16. Something strange. Something that seems out of place. Because, why would God command that the sins of the people be sent to a spiritual being? Why was the goat sent to Azazel and not simply away? Why does such a specific name appear there and then never again? The answer is, because his name carries a history that predates Moses. The people were already familiar with this tradition. The people knew about the fallen angel. I knew about the desert. I knew he was guilty. I knew there was an entity associated with sin and chaos. And now, with this context, you begin to realize how deep the narrative involving Azazel is. He was not just an angel who fell. He was a catalyst, a force that accelerated corruption, a being that crossed boundaries and destroyed borders that should never have been touched. And yet, what makes this story even more fascinating is that, despite all the destruction he caused, Azazel remains one of the most hidden, most avoided, most silent characters within traditional theology. Why was his name suppressed? Why was his story hidden? Why were the ancients afraid to mention it? Why did only extra-biblical traditions dare to record their deeds? Why, then, does its shadow subtly appear in the Bible? These questions don't have simple answers, but they all point to one fact. Azazel represents the most dangerous side of knowledge, not the one who liberates, but the one who corrupts. Azazel's story takes an even darker turn when we reach the moment of divine judgment. Up to this point, we have witnessed corruption, forbidden teaching, the rebellion of the Watchers, and the spiritual and moral collapse of humanity. But now we enter even deeper territory, divine judgment, a moment when heaven and earth align to correct the distortion that had taken over the planet. When the human clamor, mixed with the chaos brought by the Nephilim, rose to the heavens, creation was already unrecognizable. Violence reigned. Fear was spreading. Primitive cities became fortresses of war. Nature was being devoured. And the very essence of life was being corrupted by angelic interference. It was impossible to wait any longer. And then, according to the Book of Enoch, God summoned the archangels. Miguel, Gabriel, Raphael, and Uriel received direct and specific orders, each reflecting an aspect of divine justice. Miguel would be the one to carry out the sentence against Semiaza, the leader of the Watchers. Gabriel would destroy the Nephilim, the giants who terrorized humanity. Raphael would have a special mission, to deal with Azazel. Note something very important. Azazel was not treated like the others. He received a unique, targeted, personal sentence. The order given to Raphael was clear and impactful. Azazel garment, grab him by the hands and feet. Cast it into the darkness. Open up the burning desert. Throw it in there. Cover it with sharp stones. Leave him there forever, until the day of final judgment. This sentence is one of the harshest recorded in ancient spiritual texts. And what's most impressive is that she is direct, detailed, and specific. Azazel would be isolated, not destroyed. He would be imprisoned, not annihilated. He would live with the weight of his own corruption. He would not be erased from existence. And here begins our preparation for the climax. But before we move on, we need to understand a crucial detail. Why the desert? The desert is not just a physical place, but a spiritual one. It is synonymous with isolation, the absence of divine presence, emptiness, and chaos. It is a place where nothing grows, where there is no life, where silence reigns. It is a distant echo of the primordial abyss. Placing Azazel in the desert is symbolically placing him at the furthest point possible from divine order. It is absolute exile. And this helps us understand why, centuries later, the Day of Atonement ritual sent the scapegoat into the desert for Azazel. Because that place, that void, became the physical representation of the distance between God and evil. But let's return to the narrative. When the moment of imprisonment arrived, traditions describe an intense scene. Azazel, once glorious, majestic, and luminous, was now being led to his final destiny. And unlike other fallen angels, he did not fight. It is not said that he ran away. It is not said that he tried to resist the celestial force. It's as if he knew, as if fully aware that the line had been crossed, as if its very essence recognized the weight of guilt. The image is powerful. An angel in chains, dragged by celestial forces into the heart of a burning, empty desert, covered with sharp stones, as if creation itself were sealing the wound he had inflicted on humanity. And the sentence continued, "He will remain there until eternal fire consumes him on the great day." This detail is essential. Azazel is not just a rebellious character. He is a symbol of imprisoned evil, of forbidden knowledge held captive, of corruption limited by divine order. But the story doesn't end there. While this was happening on the spiritual plane, in the world of men, the earth was still suffering the consequences of the rebellion. It was in this context that God spoke to Enoch again, saying, "Explain to the watchers what is coming. Explain to them that their children, the giants, will be destroyed. Explain that they will not return to heaven. Explain that the flood is coming." The message was harsh. The watchers pleaded for mercy. They asked Enoch to intercede. They requested a response. They promised silence. They promised submission. But God was clear. Nothing they ask for will be granted. Here we see one of the most exciting passages in history. Enoch, a simple mortal, carries a plea for forgiveness from celestial beings to the heavens, and that forgiveness is denied. It's as if the scales have already become too unbalanced, as if there were no turning back, as if the rebellion had been too deep. This shows us the magnitude of the Watcher's fall and Azazel's central role in that collapse. Now, we need to understand why Azazel was held so heavily accountable. This is linked to the concept of spiritual responsibility. The security guards shouldn't be teaching anything. But if someone teaches, if someone guides, if someone influences, they become responsible for the consequences. And Azazel didn't just teach neutral things. He taught the secrets that distorted creation. He gave humans the power to destroy. He gave them vanity. He made them proud. He gave them the false glow of artificial beauty. He gave them access to dangerous spiritual forces. He gave them techniques that would be used for violence and manipulation. That is why the divine decree declared, all iniquities will be attributed to Azazel, not because he committed all acts alone, but because he was the source. Imagine a rotten tree. Branches are sins. The fruits of this are violence. But the root is Azazel. That's why its fall is so symbolic. That is why his name appears so rarely in the Bible, but when it does appear, it appears powerfully. Leviticus 16 is not there by chance. The scapegoat ritual is no ordinary ritual. It is a spiritual memory, an echo of the past, a physical representation of something much greater. When the priest placed his hands on the goat and declared the sins of the people, it was as if he were saying, just as in the beginning of time, all the evil that has spread throughout humanity had a point of origin. Today we symbolically return that evil to its root, the desert of Azazel. It's a powerful image, powerful, deep, and it shows us that the influence of this fallen angel has not been forgotten. She simply became hidden. But the story is about to intensify even further. Now that we understand the rebellion, the trial, the imprisonment, and the connection to biblical ritual, we are ready to enter the most dramatic point of all, the climax, which will reveal the ultimate meaning of Azazel's fall, its connection to the destiny of humanity, and the definitive answer to the question that drives this video. Why was Azazel the angel whose guilt fell upon the world? We have reached the most crucial point in this narrative. Now that we understand the Watcher scenario, the fall of the angels, Azazel's role in the chaos of ancient humanity, and the sentence pronounced against him, it's time to reveal the final meaning, that which ties all the loose ends together and answers the big question. Why was Azazel separated, isolated, punished, and symbolically remembered in the scapegoat ritual? To do this, we need to understand a spiritual principle that runs throughout ancient theology, the principle of the origin of corruption. Many believe that evil begins with isolated acts, with individual choices, with small deviations. But ancient spiritual traditions present a different view. Deep evil does not arise from chaos. It is born from the corruption of something sacred. And Azazel represents exactly that. He was no ordinary rebel. He was not an enemy of God in the common sense. He did not wage wars in heaven. He did not lead destructive angelic armies. He did not sit on the throne of darkness. No, his sin was more subtle and therefore more devastating. Azazel's sin was to pervert the purpose of divine knowledge. While most watchers fell because of passion, desire, or curiosity, Azazel fell because of something deeper, because of the allure of the power that forbidden knowledge offered to humans. When Azazel taught metallurgy, he wasn't just teaching craftsmanship, he was teaching warfare. When she taught about cosmetics, she wasn't teaching about beauty, she was teaching about vanity and seduction. When he taught spells, he wasn't teaching spirituality, he was teaching manipulation. What Azazel taught was not neutral knowledge. It was knowledge that altered human nature. It was knowledge that accelerated corruption. It was knowledge that tipped the balance of the world. The Bible doesn't detail this, but ancient traditions screen this truth between the lines. That's precisely why Azazel becomes such a unique figure. It is the point where heaven touches earth and becomes contaminated. It is the moment when the sacred becomes profane. Now pay close attention, because this is the strongest, deepest, and most theological point of the narrative, the moment when the promise made on the hook is fulfilled. The scapegoat ritual was not merely a symbolic gesture, it was an echo, a reminder, a spiritual remembrance of Azazel's judgment. Every year on the Day of Atonement, the sins of Israel were placed on the head of a live goat, and this animal was sent into the desert, the same desert where Azazel had been imprisoned, according to tradition. It was not an act of worship to Azazel. It wasn't even an attempt to please him. It was an act that affirmed, evil has no place among us. Evil must be expelled. Evil must return to where it came from, and that's extraordinary. The goat carried the guilt of the people, just as Azazel carried the guilt of ancient humanity. It was as if, every year, the ritual proclaimed, what Azazel started, he will not win. What has been corrupted ... will be purified. What was taught in secret will be confronted by holiness. This is the heart of the climax. Azazel is not just a fallen angel. He is the symbol of corruption trying to enter the world. And the scapegoat ritual is a symbol of spiritual resistance against this corruption. This is too powerful to ignore. Now we come to an even deeper point. Azazel, according to ancient traditions, is more than just a character. He is a metaphor, a parable, a portrayal of the invisible war between knowledge and morality. It represents what happens when talent becomes pride, knowledge becomes a weapon, beauty turns into vanity, spirituality becomes manipulation, power becomes domination. Azazel is the path of almost sacred, almost permitted, almost enlightening. But it is precisely in the almost that the danger lies. His downfall shows that not everything that glitters is light. Not everything that appears to be evolution is progress. Not all knowledge is a blessing. Not all revelation is divine. Sometimes it is precisely the knowledge that most fascinates that most destroys. This is the hidden message that spans millennia. According to Enoch, Azazel remains imprisoned to this day. He is chained, imprisoned in the deep desert, awaiting the day of final judgment. This has two spiritual meanings. 1. Evil can be contained. Evil does not have absolute freedom. There is a limit. There is a border. There is justice. 2. Evil was not destroyed, but it was defeated. Azazel is still alive, but he has no power. He remains conscious, but has no influence. It still exists, but it doesn't dominate. It is the perfect representation of divine victory over corruption. Now we come to the profound reflection you asked for to conclude the script. The lesson, the moral, the message that leaves the viewer satisfied, impacted, and emotionally fulfilled. The story of Azazel is not just about a fallen angel. It's about us. It's about what we do with the knowledge we receive. It's about how we manage the power we have. It's about how we deal with what fascinates us. It's about the limits we choose to cross or not. Azazel fell not because he did something great, but because he crossed a small line, the line of obedience. He took it a step further, a step that seemed small, a step that seemed innocent. But that step paved the way for chaos. Today, we face the same choices every day. Small decisions that seem harmless, but they shape our destiny. The story of Azazel reminds us that not everything we can do, we should do. Not every open door should be crossed. Not every opportunity is a blessing. Not all knowledge is enlightenment. And not all teaching comes from the right source. It is a profound reflection on responsibility, on limits, and on purpose. And more, it is also a story about justice, about restoration, and about the triumph of divine order over corruption. As centuries passed, as kingdoms rose and fell, as humanity evolved, the name of Azazel remained in silence. Her story was buried, hidden, avoided. But his lessons remain alive. Azazel is the shadow of knowledge that corrupts. It is the echo of the past that warns us. It symbolizes that even the most elevated beings can fall when they forget their origin. And upon learning this truth, you now see that the forbidden secret of the fallen angels is not just about the past. It's about the present. It's about us, and if you've made it this far, you deserve to know. There are many other hidden secrets in the scriptures, many forbidden mysteries, many forgotten names, and all of them hold profound truths. The story doesn't end with Azazel. It's only just beginning.